a bit. You guys have an inside view of what's happened on the Wilfrid Laurier campus since the Lindsay Shepherd affair broke.
I should just say that, after this Robitaille event, I read David's piece and immediately emailed him and just said,
and that's how we,
kindred
right.
soul.
Right.
And we met and we had lunch and just talked about free speech and the Chicago Statement and how can we get it implemented at the university, but we just couldn't see any way forward and really felt
right. So that's another thing we want to discuss. You guys have rewritten the Chicago Statement,
that's
right, so that it's more appropriate in a Canadian context.
Right. We call it the Laurier Statement for Freedom of Expression.
Okay. And you've been trying to convince, or you've been trying to communicate with the university authorities to have that ratified, essentially adopted as a statement of principles. And have you had any success with that, or what's the consequence?
They deferred to a task force that's going to be held, and we can certainly.
Okay, is that in the aftermath of the Shepherd affair? Is that going to be part of it?
We didn't really do anything over the summer, just because it just seemed too big a mountain, and there seemed to be no way to introduce the idea,
right.
The catalyst for it.
Now you've got your catalyst.
And Lindsay Shepherd becomes the catalyst. And,
oh my goodness.
And what object lesson in what goes on at Laurier, but also what an object lesson in how you handle these free speech opponents. She's really given a model that other students, I hope, will follow. But it was through this Robitaille thing that we got to know each other and a few others.
Yeah, there's a couple more of you.
That's right.
And so about 5, I think you told me.
That's right. So the Robitaille incident really brought us out of the woodwork. We started to chat and say, we see this problem on our university. We don't know what to do. And then when the Lindsay Shepherd scandal broke, we all immediately were emailing us, it's happened again, is essentially what we were saying. And we said, we've got to do something about this. I was out on a trip, and I came home and I said to my wife, where are the newspapers? This was November 12th when the story broke, Christy Blatchford's story. And I said, hey, honey, where are the newspapers? She said, I can't let you see them. I said, why not? She said, you cannot read the papers. And of course, it was because Christy Blatchford's article was in there. So as soon as I read it, I was beside myself. I thought, it's happened again. And this time, this is really terrible. They've attacked a TA, is what they've done. So I contacted...
With the full force of the administration.
Right. And claims that she had done mental harm.
Yeah, broken 2 laws. Two laws, federal and provincial.
I was sincerely worried that they were going to railroad this young lady.
So they could have easily taken her to the Ontario Human Rights Commission. They would have had a field day.
What was going to happen? I contacted Christy Blatchford. I said, can you put me in touch with her? She was kind enough to do so. I got in touch with Lindsay, and I said, I know that this is a terrible time, but you've got a professor who supports you. I knew that these gentlemen also would. And then as quickly as I could, I wrote an op-ed for the Toronto Star that week, just again saying, this is happening. The world needs to be aware of it. But it was really after that Monday, after the story broke on the Saturday, we started to talk. And how can we assist Lindsay? And how can we...
Well, the op-ed helped.
It did.
And the fact that the Star ran it was quite remarkable as well. So hooray to the Star.
The Star really does want to do its best to champion free expression.
Yeah, well, you'd think journalists would actually be concerned about that to some degree.
So.
Well, and I think they are. Like, one of the things that's happened to me in the last year is that although the press coverage of what I did, and just to remind people, so last year I made a video about Bill C16, which was the bill whose provisions Lindsay Shepherd theoretically transgressed against, just to be clear about that. And when I first made the video, I was accused by all sorts of people, including journalists, of, well, first of all, making unnecessary noise and being unnecessarily alarmist, which were the minor accusations. And then the more major accusations were that, I was all the things that you'd expect a far-right agitator to be, a bigot and a transphobe and a racist and all of these things. And so, but what was interesting was that the journalists, by and large, especially the main journalists, turned around on that issue really quickly. It was probably within 3 weeks, because what happened was a couple of them actually went and read the policy documents that I had referred to on the Ontario Human Rights Commission website, which are still there and which are still appalling and have led exactly to this situation with Lindsay. And as soon as they read what I had been outing, let's say, in my video, then they started to understand that that I wasn't just ringing a bell for no reason at all. It was actually reasonable, I think, of people to go after me to begin with, because Canada is such a safe and peaceful place, and our political situation and economic situation has been so stable that when someone comes out and says, look, we're in danger of making a major error, the logical first response should be, no, there's something wrong with you. It's like, we're fine, there's something wrong with you.
The law is just trying to protect these people.
Right, exactly. Well, and so it's reasonable. I think it was reasonable for me to be hit hard in the aftermath of doing that, because, well, generally speaking, whistleblowers in Canada or alarmists in Canada have very little to be alarmist about.
Right.
But okay, so fine. So this thing happened with Lindsay. What have you seen happening on the Wilfrid Laurier campus?
Well, things that I'm not particularly proud of, I would say. I mean, I knew that Will and some other colleagues were going to come to the aid of Lindsay, but I was thinking that once her recording became public, that we would just have a flood of professors coming to support our cause, which is, we had a Laurier Statement for Freedom of Expression modeled on the Chicago Statement. We thought that immediately people would just say, of course, we need to reinforce that this needs to be the primary mission. Free expression, free inquiry needs to be the primary mission.
And we got that out pretty fast.
We really did.
In about 10 days. And got it on change.org. And then I was emailing everybody that I knew and trying to get people interested. And I would say out of 50 emails I sent, I got 15 signatures from personal relationships.
So even with personal relationships, you could only get a 30% hit rate. So what do you think's stopping professors from signing that, say, or clambering on board, especially in the aftermath of the Shepherd recording, which we should point out, you know, and this is one of the things that's very interesting, is that outside Wilfrid Laurier and perhaps outside universities that are in the same boat, the reaction to that recording was universal, right? And national and international and uniform. And the reaction was, what the hell? This is scandalous. There's nothing about this that is acceptable, right? And so what struck me as so remarkable is that even though there's been international outrage over this and outrage of a sort that's only been disputed by a very small number of people, at least to begin with, Wilfrid Laurier responded en masse, let's say, as if this was somehow debatable, you know, as if there were two sides of the story here, let's say. And I thought, Rambukkana and Pimlott, who were the professors, what they did, I thought, was appalling in upbraiding her and in the manner in which they did it and in the language that they used. But I thought what was truly terrifying was the presence of Adria Joel at that inquisition, because she was an administrator who was hired specifically to do exactly what she was doing by legislated necessity on the part of the Ontario Liberal government, right? Because it wasn't just the university that was involved in this. Her position was set up because of legislative necessity, which is something also to keep in mind when we're going after the universities. Okay, so you had a hard time getting faculty on board. How many faculty members did sign it?
59, is it?
Yeah.
Out of how many faculty?
550 full-time. Yeah. And so you say, well, what's going on with them? Well, I think that some maybe, I know this is hard to believe, but maybe unaware, even now.
I think there's a big proportion that are unaware. It's unbelievable as that is.
I think that some
Okay, well, that's its own mystery, because I don't know where you'd have to have been in the last month to not have noticed that this has
I think
happened.
that people, perhaps in the sciences, the computer sciences, the math, they've got their head down and they're doing their research. And so I don't think there's anything diabolical there. I think that
But business as well. I got very few signatures from the business faculty. I mean, some, but a lot of people just aren't engaged. It's a bit of a commuter school, a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I think people are just getting on with their research and their teaching, maybe not aware of the politics.
Well, that's an interesting thing in and of itself, because I think part of what's led to the occupation of the university, let's say, by the radical postmodern types, is the proclivity of the scientists in particular, but also, I would say, the more serious scholars, to be focusing narrowly on their field of inquiry, which is essentially what they should be doing, and not paying attention to any of the broader contextual issues, which is actually a perfectly fine strategy when things are going well, but a terrible strategy when they're not.
And what you also see, so we've got these people who might not be aware, and we've got the few who are aware and are supporting maximum free expression. But then you've got these other people who are convinced that maximum free expression, free inquiry, is not a good thing for a university. And those people are definitely congregated within the arts and the humanities, and they justify it because they are applying a social justice lens, or what they would call a critical theory lens, to this entire issue. And
how about a quick summary of critical theory?
Well, critical theory, I mean, in a nutshell, it's an idea that came from the Frankfurt School in Germany. It transfers over to Columbia University. It is some German scholars who are Marxists, and what they are saying is that Marxism as an economic unit or as an economic philosophy really doesn't work. It doesn't transfer very well. But let's change it over to a social theory, and it's a theory of oppressor and oppressed, and it's very bifurcated. You are either one or the other, and if you are the oppressed, you're good. And if you're the oppressor, you're bad. And it's as simple as that. There's no nuance. Or, okay, I'm being as bad as they are. So I'm giving you the really broad strokes on this. But essentially, it does set up the villain and the victim. And it is the idea that we must do everything to silence the villain, the oppressor, and
to center to the oppressed.
Yes, and then we will elevate the oppressed. And
the same thing happened essentially with the French deconstructionists in the 1970s.
It is. So this is the motivation behind it. So, but when you hear them talk about critical theory, it is not critical thinking. There's a big difference. And so parents will hear, well, they're teaching critical theory. Isn't that a good thing? No, because critical thinking means I'm going to show you both sides of this argument. Critical theory means I'm going to deliberately give you one side of the argument. I'm going to tell you who's right, and I'm going to tell you who's wrong. There's an oppressor and an oppressed. The oppressor is the bad guy. The oppressed is the good guy. And it's a very manipulative way of thinking.
Okay, so there's, let's say, two reasons why people wouldn't sign the petition. One is they're doing something else, and they're just not interested in it, and fair enough, even though I think that's dangerous at the moment. The second is that they're actually philosophically or ideologically opposed to the propositions. And so to what degree do you think the latter is the determining factor behind the relatively small degree of support that you guys have been able to drum up?
That's a big thing. A group of faculty signed an open letter to the university complaining about the violence, and that the administration need to make the campus safe.
Yeah, they did the same thing with me after I made my video. I made the campus unsafe, and 200 people signed a petition.
What does unsafe mean? I mean, this is the problem. The left, the far left, are taking words that have a traditional meaning, a traditional definition, and they're blowing that definition completely away. And at one time, harm meant that there was an infliction of damage that would have lasting effect, and it would compromise the appearance or the function, right? We can think about damage to a car, right? Lasting, and it's affecting the appearance or the function. That's what harm is. But they've stretched that definition so that it becomes meaningless, that an objectionable idea becomes harm. That when you show a video, you've made a place unsafe. And that...
Yeah, that's the language of trigger warnings and safe space.
But it's disingenuous.
There was a trans rally, and one of the speakers said that I hope I can quote this properly, letting Peterson's views be heard in the classroom is violence. It is violence.
Yeah, right. No, those are certainly. Yes, you can react with violence. Yes, well, that's often what I think that I've thought a lot about. One of the tenets of postmodernism, less so I would say of critical theory, but particularly of postmodernism, and its more Marxist variants, is that the only motivation for the construction of hierarchies is power. And you think, well, no. There's lots of reasons for producing hierarchies, right? There's hierarchies of competence, there's hierarchies of interest, there's hierarchies of aesthetic quality. Like there's all sorts of, wherever you can make a qualitative judgment, you make a hierarchy. So there's the idea that power is the only driving force behind the construction of hierarchies is absolutely preposterous. So you think, well, why in the world would anyone make that claim that it's only power that exists? Well, as far as I can tell, at least one of the reasons is that it justifies the use of power. Now, if you have your position because of power, which is basically tyranny, then I'm fully warranted in my use of power against you. That's all there is. So I think it's a great justification for it. Okay, so how many people signed the petition stating that the campus had become unsafe?
That was like 79. 79, just like that.
Okay, so you got more people signing a petition claiming that what Shepherd did made the campus unsafe than you did getting... Okay, so that's interesting, because one of the things we're going to address later is the president's letter as a consequence of the inquiry into the Lindsay Shepherd affair. And one of the things she says, people who've tried to downplay what happened at Wilfrid Laurier have said basically 2 or 3 things. One is that, well, that Shepherd is not to be trusted, and she's really like a subtle arm of the right wing. That's one, and that she's a reprehensible character. Yes, or Peterson. I know they directly went after her. I'm quite sneaky that way. The second is that Pimlott, Rambukkana, and Joel misinterpreted Bill C16, which I think is absolutely preposterous. I think they interpreted exactly the way that it was written, especially if you consider the surrounding policies, and that's what I was warning about last September. And the third is that this was an isolated incident and doesn't truly reflect the reality either of Wilfrid Laurier or other campuses. And that's stated explicitly in the president's letter. And so that's one of the things I wanted to discuss, because I don't buy that. I think this wasn't an anomaly. This wasn't people stepping out of line. And I think the proof of that is not what Rambukkana did or Pimlott, because we could say, yeah, they're ideologically committed professors, and they're not very professional in their administrative abilities, and they went after a TA unprofessionally and stupidly. That's bad. That's not really bad. What's really bad was that there was a paid administrator at the meeting who was hired to do exactly that. And so the fact that she was there is the proof to me that this is not only not an isolated incident, it's actually a logical and inevitable consequence of legislative moves that made these bureaucratic positions necessary, and the practical reality that these administrative positions do exist on the campuses. So there's no isolated incident issue there. Now, how do you think Lindsay